They called the signal a ghost. She called it a map. The first thing Vera noticed about the new system was the silence. Not absence of sound. The Ariad was never quiet, not with 43 crew members, breathing recycled air, and the low-frequency thrum of the fold drive cycling down from jump. It was a different kind of silence. The kind that fills a room when something old and patient has been watching you for longer than you've been watching back. She pulled up the spectrographic overlay and stared at it, the way her father used to stare at bad weather, knowing it was coming, calculating how bad. Commander Ozil. She kept her voice flat. The signal. Ozil didn't look up from the navigation console. He had the build of a man who'd never doubted himself. Wide-shouldered, jaw set like continental shelf. He'd led the expedition through the Kareth corridor, through the Bellian dust storms, through 31 months of jump lag and ration cuts, and one mutiny he never officially logged. He trusted his own instincts with a totality Vera had always found both admirable and quietly dangerous. It's a ghost signal, he said. Old beacon, pre-compact. Log it and move on. It's moving, she said. He looked up then. Signal was moving in the way a predator moves. Not toward them, not yet, but parallel. Pacing. It had the same lazy, unhurried rhythm as something that knows it doesn't need to rush. Magnetic interference, said old Drow from his post at the environmental array. He had a face, like a topographic map, of somewhere inhospitable, and 40 years in your deep certainty, it's the comfortable certainty of a man who has already been wrong about everything dangerous that exists and survived it. This system has 3 magnetized moons and a collapsed protostar. Every sensor we have is reading dirty. Vera wanted to say the signal is organized. She wanted to say, interference doesn't repeat in intervals of exactly 4.7 seconds. She wanted to say, I have been running the numbers for 6 hours while you slept, and I am not wrong about this. Instead, she said, yes, Commander, and logged the signal, and didn't sleep. She was astray in the truest sense. A xenolinguist attached to the expedition at the last moment, budget line item, barely tolerated. She'd come aboard with her portable analysis rig and a reputation for being difficult, which meant she asked questions that made people uncomfortable. On a ship, uncomfortable questions are a form of bad weather all their own. The creature took Pell on the 3rd night. He was running a perimeter scan on the planet's surface. A routine atmospheric check. Boots on regolith for the first time in 14 months. And it would have felt like freedom to him. Vera knew that, because she'd felt it too. The weight of the sky above you instead of hull plating. Something larger than the Ariad's corridors. They found his scanner beacons still transmitting. They found the impression in the ash soil, where something very large had stood, and beside it a set of prints that didn't match any catalog genus in the xenobiology database. Beetle, heavy-footed, deliberate. Ozil looked at the prints and said, rockslide displaced debris. He wandered off course in the dark, fell into a fissure. We'll find him. Vera looked at the prints and said nothing. She went back to her bunk and pulled up the acoustic file she'd been building. Fragments of the signal, cleaned and stitched. She ran it through the standard xenocontact matrices. Nothing. She ran it through the military pattern recognition suite she wasn't supposed to have. Nothing. Then she ran it through a model she'd built herself. Bootstrapped from 4 years of fieldwork on non-human communication structures. And the software flagged something it had never flagged before in her career. Intentionality. The signal wasn't information, it was inquiry. Something out there was asking a question. She brought it to Ozil in the morning. He listened, the way men listen when they've already decided the answer. Head slightly tilted, expression of patient tolerance. When she finished, he said, you've been awake for 30 hours. He said it the way you say it to someone who has stopped being useful. Sir, whatever took Pell isn't random. It's watching us. It's a predator, he said. This planet has predators, same as every planet with atmosphere and protein chain. Post watches, we move in pairs, we don't go out after dark. Standard protocol. You're a linguist, Vera, not a xenobiologist. Leave threat assessment to people qualified to. I am qualified to tell you that signal is not animal behavior. He looked at her for a long moment. Log your findings. I'll have Drow review them. Drow would not review them. She knew that. Drow believed what Ozil believed. As Drow had always believed what whoever commanded him believed. A rock-solid institutional faith that had probably kept him alive through 40 years of deep survey, and had also, she suspected, gotten a number of other people quietly killed. She posted herself at the sensor array that night and watched the darkness. It came at 0340 hours. Not the creature. She still hadn't seen it. Still only knew it by its negative space, by what wasn't there when it should have been. What came at 0340 was Drow, wild-eyed, dragging a sesame-conscious Merritt by the arm. Merritt was on watch duty. Merritt had a gash across her forearm that hadn't been made by any tool in the inventory. Was saying something about a demon, about a curse, about the planet itself rejecting them. His voice cycling through registers Vera had never heard from him before. The registers of a man whose certainties had just been taken apart. I saw it, Merritt kept saying. I saw its face. What color were its eyes? Vera asked. Everyone looked at her like she was insane. But Merritt answered, yellow, like old bone. Vera went back to her analysis rig and added that to the model. The crisis came 3 days later. The way Sci-Fi's come. Not as a single catastrophic event, but as a sequence of reasonable decisions made by frightened people in the dark. Drow decided, with a conviction born of desperation, that the creature was drawn to Vera specifically. He had a theory. It involved the electromagnetic signature of her personal analysis equipment, which was eccentric and powerful, and broadcast on frequencies she'd never bothered to clean up because she'd built the rig herself at age 22, and no one had told her to. The theory wasn't entirely wrong. The signature of her rig was unusual, but the conclusion Drow reached from it, that she was the source of the threat. That the expedition was simply removed from the equation. That was the conclusion of a man who needed an answer badly enough to accept a bad one. He brought it to Ozel. Ozel, to his credit, didn't immediately agree, but Ozel was managing a crew on the edge of breakdown. A chain of command fraying at every link, a mission timeline that had already slipped 3 weeks, and a dead crew member with no official explanation. He needed the crew to believe the problem was contained. Strict your equipment use to the ship, he told her. Find to quarters between 2000 and 0600. It was almost reasonable. It was almost protective. She saw, watching his face, that he believed it would help. That was the worst part. He wasn't being cruel. He was doing the thing that leaders do when they're lost. He was making a decision, because a bad decision made firmly feels, in the moment, like control. She complied. She always complied, because she was a stray, and strays learn early that compliance is survival currency. Then the aurora came. It appeared at 2,300 hours, a wash of violet and gold across the upper atmosphere. The kind of light that makes you feel like you're watching something that was old when the galaxy was young. Vera watched it from the porthole of her quarters and felt the sensor array spike. Massive, sudden, directional, and understood immediately what it meant. Creature communicated by light, not signal light, not bioluminescence in any standard sense. Something older than that. Something structural, woven into whatever passed for its nervous system. In the presence of the aurora, its own emissions became readable. Not words, not language as she had catalogued language, but pattern, sequence, the arithmetic of need. I am here, you are there. This is the space between us. This is what I want to know about that space. She left her quarters at 2,317 hours, which was a violation of direct orders. She found the signal's source point by following the geometry. The creature was methodical. She'd understood that from the first night, and methodical things leave trails if you know how to look for them. It had been circling the camp in a pattern, centered not on the ship but on the atmospheric sampling array, on the ridge's eastern face. The array was the only piece of equipment they had that broadcast in the same frequency range as the aurora. It had been trying to talk to the array. She climbed the ridge in the dark with her analysis rig on her back, and her heart hammering in a way she recognized from fieldwork. Not panic. Not quite. Particular flavor of fear that comes from knowing you might be right, and knowing that being right is not the same as being safe. She found the first one on the ridge's far side. It was not what she'd imagined. She'd spent 4 days constructing mental models. Predator, xenomorph, something with teeth and territorial instinct, and nothing behind its eyes. She she found was roughly 2.5 meters tall, bilaterally symmetrical, with a cranial structure she immediately recognized as suggesting processing capacity well above the threshold for symbolic thought. It was wearing a breathing apparatus constructed from materials she couldn't immediately identify. It was holding a device that was, unmistakably, a recording instrument. It was studying them. It turned when she crested the ridge, and for a moment they were both completely still, the two of them, in the aurora light, separated by 11 meters and 40,000 years of evolutionary divergence, and the entire weight of what it means to meet something you don't have a word for yet. Then it made a sound. She had the acoustic profile already. She'd been building it for days. She ran the sound through the model in real time, and the model returned. Variation of inquiry pattern, second register, contextually equivalent to, "What are you?" Hands were shaking. She steadied them. She pressed record. She responded in the only way she knew how. Not in any language, human or otherwise, but in structure. She produced the signal pattern she'd extracted from the Aurora transmissions and played it back, modified by a single variable. Acknowledgement. I received what you sent. Here it is, returned, with this one change. I am the one who received it. The creature was silent for 7 seconds. Then it answered. Tss. What followed was not a conversation in any sense she could have anticipated. It was more like two people on opposite sides of a locked door, passing notes through the gap at the bottom, each note changing what the next one needed to say. She didn't understand most of it. She wasn't supposed to understand most of it. Understanding wasn't the point. Contact was the point, the establishment of the basic fact. There is something on this side of the door. It thinks. It listens. It answers. She was still at the array when Ozil found her at 0430 hours. 3 armed crew members behind him. His face the particular mask of a man who has been frightened and translated that fright directly into anger, because anger is a more comfortable place to stand. He saw the creature. The creature saw him. The creature made a sound she hadn't heard before. The model flagged it as alarm, not aggression, not warning. Alarm. The sound of something that has been surprised into realizing it underestimated the situation. Ozil raised his weapon. Don't, she said. He hesitated. Just a fraction. The hesitation of a man who is not, at his core, reckless, and who can still hear something when it's said with enough certainty. She used that fraction, Commander. She kept her voice level, fieldwork voice, the one that has to function when your hands won't stop shaking. It's been here longer than we have. It watched us come down. It analyzed our equipment. It tried to establish contact through the array because our array broadcasts in its communication frequency. It is not hunting us. It has never been hunting us. Pell, he said. Merit. Territorial response to what it perceived as an incursion into a den site. Same thing would happen with any animal on any surveyed planet we've mapped. She paused. Except it's not an animal. Look at what it's carrying. Ozil looked. He was a man who'd navigated by observation for 31 months. And observation was still, somewhere beneath the fear and the authority and the certainty, his first instinct. He looked at the recording device. He looked at the breathing apparatus. He looked at the creature's eyes. Yellow old bone, watching him with an attention that was, undeniably, thinking. It wants to know what we are, Vera said quietly. The same as us. The silence stretched. The aurora pulsed overhead, gold and violet, ancient. Creature made a low sound, not the alarm register anymore. Something slower, patient. She played it through the model, and the model returned a match she'd flagged 3 days ago and filed away because it seemed too simple. Waiting. We can leave, she said. And whatever we're carrying, the fear, the story we'll tell about the monster in the dark that follows us. Follows the next expedition and the one after that, or... She let the word stand alone for a moment. We stay, and we learn what it's asking. Ozil lowered the weapon. Not all the way. Part way, which was honest. Part way was the truth of the situation, the best any of them could manage. Part way was enough. She turned back to the creature and pressed record and began again. Later, much later, after the slow, patient work of months, after what the xenolinguistics community would call the most significant first contact event in the history of human expansion, after her name was attached to a field of study that hadn't existed before she climbed a ridge in the dark with shaking hands. She would try to explain to people what that moment felt like, the moment of turning back. She never found the right words for it. Language, it turns out, is better at describing the things that happen than the things that turn. What she usually said was this: "We were afraid of the dark because we didn't know what lived in it. Turns out what lived in it was afraid of us for exactly the same reason. And the only thing that changed anything was one person deciding that wasn't a good enough reason to stop listening." Then she'd pause. The way her father used to pause before the punchline of a story that wasn't really a joke. "We try again," she'd say. "That's the whole answer. Every time we try again."